There is a kind of loneliness that almost everyone recognizes. It arrives after moving to a new city, after losing someone you love, after spending too many nights alone. This loneliness is visible. It has an obvious explanation. But there is another kind of loneliness that is far more difficult to describe. You can experience it while surrounded by friends, while sitting beside your family, while laughing at dinner, even while thousands of people interact with you every day online. Everything appears normal. Yet somewhere beneath the conversations, beneath the routines, beneath the smiles, there remains the quiet feeling that no one truly knows you. Psychologists have become increasingly interested in this distinction. Researchers often separate social isolation from perceived loneliness. Social isolation is objective. You simply have very little contact with other people. Perceived loneliness is something entirely different. It measures the distance between the relationships you have and the relationships you wish you had. Someone may spend every evening alone without feeling lonely. Someone else may spend every hour surrounded by people while carrying an overwhelming sense of emotional isolation. In fact, some studies suggest that the subjective feeling of loneliness predicts health outcomes more strongly than the actual number of social connections. This immediately raises an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps loneliness is not primarily about how many people surround you. Perhaps it is about how much of yourself feels safe enough to be seen. Imagine two conversations. In the first, two coworkers spend an hour discussing deadlines, weather, sports, and weekend plans. The conversation is pleasant. Nothing feels wrong. Yet afterward, both quietly return home feeling strangely empty. Now imagine another conversation lasting only 15 minutes. Someone admits they are afraid. Someone else responds, "I thought I was the only one." Very little information has been exchanged. Yet both leave feeling lighter. Objectively, the second conversation was much shorter. Emotionally, it was infinitely closer. This difference helps explain why loneliness often survives inside busy lives. Modern adults communicate more than almost any generation before them. Messages arrive instantly. Meetings fill entire calendars. Group chats never stop. Social media continuously reminds us that other people exist. And yet surveys across many countries continue showing that large numbers of adults regularly report feeling lonely. The problem may not be that conversation disappeared. It may be that vulnerability became increasingly rare. Human beings evolved inside remarkably small communities. For most of history, people lived alongside individuals who witnessed nearly every stage of their lives. They saw your childhood. They knew your parents. They remembered your mistakes. They watched you grow stronger. Identity developed inside relationships that lasted decades. Today, life often looks very different. We move cities. We change careers. Friendship groups dissolve. Communities reorganize. Entire social circles can disappear within a few years. Technology allows us to remain connected across enormous distances. But connection and familiarity are not always the same thing. Many people know our opinions. Far fewer know our fears. Many people recognize our photographs. Far fewer recognize the parts of ourselves we struggle to accept. Perhaps this is why some people describe loneliness as the feeling of being unseen rather than being alone. Interestingly, neuroscience offers another clue. The human brain constantly predicts how other people will respond to us. If previous experiences taught us that vulnerability led to rejection, embarrassment, or disappointment, the brain begins protecting us long before danger actually appears. Without realizing it, we become experts at presenting acceptable versions of ourselves. We say we're fine. We smile automatically. We avoid difficult conversations. We become highly skilled at being socially successful while remaining emotionally invisible. Over time, something peculiar happens. The mask succeeds. People like us. They compliment us. They enjoy spending time with us. Yet a quiet question begins growing somewhere beneath the surface. If they knew the real me, would they still stay? Ironically, the very behaviors designed to protect us from loneliness can slowly create it. Because every relationship built upon a carefully edited version of ourselves leaves one uncomfortable uncertainty. Were they loving us, or merely the version we believed was safest to show? That question may quietly become one of the loneliest experiences a human being can carry. There is a fascinating psychological experiment known as the invisible gorilla. Participants are asked to count basketball passes between players. Most perform the task successfully. Yet nearly half completely fail to notice a person wearing a gorilla suit walking directly through the middle of the scene. The gorilla was never hidden. Attention simply wasn't looking for it. Loneliness may operate in surprisingly similar ways. When people have spent years believing they are fundamentally difficult to understand, the brain quietly begins filtering social experiences through that expectation. A genuine compliment feels polite rather than sincere. An invitation feels accidental. A message left unanswered for several hours becomes evidence of rejection. Not because these conclusions are objectively true, because the brain is constantly trying to confirm the emotional model it already expects. Psychologists often refer to this tendency as confirmation bias. Once the mind adopts a story about itself, it begins collecting evidence that supports the story while overlooking evidence that contradicts it. Imagine someone who quietly believes, people always leave. Every goodbye becomes unforgettable. Every canceled plan becomes proof. Every disagreement feels like the beginning of abandonment. Yet the dozens of ordinary moments when people stayed rarely receive equal emotional attention. Over months and years, the internal story grows stronger, not necessarily because reality supports it, because attention does. This creates one of loneliness's most painful cycles. The more isolated someone feels emotionally, the more carefully they begin protecting themselves. The more carefully they protect themselves, the less other people can genuinely know them. The less they are known, the more convincing loneliness becomes. The cycle reinforces itself without anyone consciously choosing it. Ironically, this protective instinct once served an important evolutionary purpose. For early humans, rejection from the group could become a matter of survival. Being excluded often meant losing protection, food, shared knowledge, and cooperation. The human brain therefore evolved extraordinary sensitivity to signs of social exclusion. Even today, brain imaging studies suggest that social rejection activates many of the same neural systems involved in physical pain. Your brain does not simply interpret loneliness as sadness. To some extent, it experiences loneliness as danger. This explains why loneliness often produces hypervigilance. People begin reading subtle facial expressions. They replay conversations repeatedly. They search for hidden meanings inside simple messages. A short reply feels unusually significant. Silence becomes emotionally loud. The brain is not trying to create suffering. It is trying to prevent future rejection before it happens. Unfortunately, this protective system often generates exactly the distance it hopes to avoid. Someone who fears rejection may hesitate to initiate conversations. Someone who expects disappointment may decline invitations before others have the opportunity to disappoint them. Someone convinced they are a burden may stop asking for help altogether. From the outside, these behaviors appear like independence. From the inside, they often feel like survival. Another hidden source of loneliness comes from comparison. Modern life gives us unprecedented access to carefully edited versions of other people's lives. We witness celebrations, achievements, vacations, weddings, career milestones, birthdays, smiling photographs. Rarely do we witness panic attacks, sleepless nights, quiet grief, financial anxiety, relationship uncertainty, ordinary insecurity. Our brains unintentionally compare our unedited inner lives to everyone else's edited public moments. The result is not merely envy. It is alienation. Everyone else appears emotionally certain. Only we seem confused. Everyone else appears deeply connected. Only we seem invisible. Yet almost everyone is making exactly the same comparison. Millions of people quietly believing they are the only ones feeling alone. Perhaps one of the greatest illusions loneliness creates is convincing us that loneliness belongs uniquely to us. In reality, it may be among the most universal human experiences that has ever existed. The difference is that almost no one talks about it honestly. And silence has an extraordinary ability to make common experiences feel exceptionally rare. Perhaps this is why the moments that heal loneliness rarely appear dramatic. Most people imagine that loneliness disappears the day they finally meet the perfect friend, the perfect partner, or the perfect community. Sometimes that happens. More often, healing begins somewhere much quieter. A conversation where someone listens without trying to solve you. An afternoon where you laugh without pretending. A moment when you admit something embarrassing and discover that the other person doesn't walk away. These experiences seem almost insignificant. Yet to the predictive brain, they represent something extraordinary. Each one becomes a prediction error. For years, the brain may have carried a silent expectation. If people truly know me, they'll leave. Then someone stays. The old prediction weakens. Not immediately. Not after one conversation. But after many conversations. Many moments of acceptance. Many ordinary experiences that quietly contradict an old emotional model. This is how trust is usually built. Not through grand declarations. Through accumulated evidence. One reliable phone call. One honest apology. One promise kept. One difficult conversation survived. One disagreement that doesn't end the relationship. Little by little, the brain begins updating its prediction. Perhaps closeness is possible. Perhaps being known is not as dangerous as it once seemed. This helps explain why therapy often feels slower than people expect. Many imagine therapy as receiving new advice. In reality, much of therapy involves creating repeated emotional experiences that gently challenge old predictions. Being listened to without judgment. Being accepted without needing perfection. Being understood without needing to perform. Over time, those experiences become new evidence. And evidence changes the brain far more reliably than inspiration alone. There is another misunderstanding about loneliness that deserves attention. People often believe that the opposite of loneliness is constant companionship. It may not be. The opposite of loneliness may be belonging. And belonging is not simply being surrounded by people. Belonging is reaching the quiet conclusion that your existence does not require constant performance. That you do not have to earn every conversation. That your value is not measured by productivity. That silence between friends is not automatically rejection. That asking for help does not make you weaker. Interestingly, researchers have found that people who possess just a few deeply trusted relationships often report greater life satisfaction than individuals with hundreds of casual acquaintances. Depth consistently outweighs quantity. Perhaps because the nervous system is not counting people. It is asking a much simpler question. Am I safe here? When the answer becomes yes, something remarkable begins happening throughout the body. Stress hormones gradually decrease. Heart rate becomes more stable. Sleep often improves. Inflammation may decline. Attention becomes less defensive. The brain no longer needs to spend every conversation scanning for hidden danger. Instead, it can become curious. Curiosity is remarkably important because it interrupts prediction. Instead of assuming, they'll never understand me, curiosity quietly asks, what if I'm wrong? That single question creates space for entirely different experiences. It opens the possibility that someone else may be carrying exactly the same invisible loneliness. Perhaps waiting for someone else to speak first. Perhaps hoping someone else will admit uncertainty. Perhaps wondering whether anyone would understand. In this sense, vulnerability becomes strangely contagious. One honest sentence often gives another person permission to become honest too. The conversation changes. Not because either person became more interesting, because both became more real. Perhaps this is why the loneliness nobody talks about survives for so long. It is rarely caused by the complete absence of people. It is sustained by the absence of emotional permission. Permission to be uncertain. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to disappoint. Permission to struggle. Permission to exist without constantly editing ourselves into more acceptable versions. And perhaps that is also why hope remains. Because loneliness is not a permanent identity. It is often a prediction. A story the brain has repeated for so long that it begins feeling like reality. Stories can be rewritten. Predictions can be updated. Relationships can become safer. The nervous system can learn. Years from now, you may look back on this season of your life with the same surprise people often describe when remembering old fears. The loneliness may not disappear because the world suddenly changed. It may disappear because, slowly, almost invisibly, your brain discovered new evidence. Evidence that someone listened, someone stayed, someone understood, and perhaps, for the first time in a very long while, you no longer felt invisible.